This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Here now are your top stories. Saudi Arabia-led coalition denies bombing a prison in northern Yemen. Russia and the United States on a diplomatic offensive to quell rising tensions over Ukraine. And we update you on efforts to assist Tonga after a devastating volcanic eruption and tsunami. Welcome to the program. Now, the Saudi Arabia-led coalition has denied reports that it bombed a prison in northern Yemen. Yemen's Houthi group says 77 people were killed and around 200 others wounded in Friday's attack. The United Nations says more strikes were reported elsewhere in the country, with children among the casualties. One attack on telecommunication facilities has disrupted internet services in large parts of the country. The Houthis on Monday attacked targets in the United Arab Emirates. 3 people died after a drone attack on an oil facility in Abu Dhabi. The group says it was to retaliate against the UAE's role in a military offensive in Yemen last week. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned the latest strikes.
The attack on Abu Dhabi is an escalation that is regrettable and, in my opinion, is a serious mistake, independently of the fact that it is unacceptable. Now, any bombardment that targets civilians or that is not careful enough to protect civilians is, of course, also unacceptable. What we need is to stop this vicious circle in which things get escalating one after the other. What we need is to have, as we have been proposing from long ago, a ceasefire together with the opening of harbor and airports, and then the beginning of a serious dialogue among the parties. This escalation needs to stop.
In Syria, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces says they've repelled an attack by the Islamic State on a prison. The IS was trying to break out inmates from the facility in the northeastern city of Hasaka, but their attempt was thwarted with the help of airstrikes by a US-led coalition. One general commander of the forces tweeted all fugitives were arrested. But the Islamic State said Friday clashes were still ongoing nearby and in other neighborhoods. A critical moment in the struggle to resolve a tense standoff between the West and Russia over Ukraine. Top diplomats from Washington and Moscow met in Geneva Friday. It is the latest in a flurry of diplomatic activity after Russia began massing troops near the border with Ukraine months ago. Chris Jones has more now from Geneva.
The mood was tense heading into the meeting between the US's Antony Blinken and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. Both sides saying they wanted to avoid conflict. Antony Blinken described it as a critical moment.
This is part of an ongoing effort to de-escalate tensions and to prevent further Russian aggression.
Russia has never, nowhere, not a single time, threatened the Ukrainian people through its official spokespersons.
After 90 minutes of diplomatic discussions, both parties said there was more understanding.
Neither Russia nor the US expected any major breakthroughs to come from the meeting here in Geneva. But one thing is clear, Moscow now expects a written response next week from the US.
The US has agreed to send a written response to those demands over Ukraine and NATO. Sergei Lavrov described the meeting as open and useful, but not conclusive.
We're waiting for the official answer written on paper to our suggestions. After that, we're going to meet again on our level. Let's not jump ahead.
Antony Blinken says much will depend on Russia's next steps.
I believe we can carry forward this work of developing understanding agreements together that ensure our mutual security. But that's contingent on Russia stopping its aggression toward Ukraine.
Sergei Lavrov claimed here in Geneva that Russia has never threatened the people of Ukraine, despite the buildup of troops at the border. The US also called on Moscow to step back from non-military provocations, such as cyber attacks. The two sides continue to disagree on a series of issues, but insist the talks were constructive. Chris Jones, CGTN, Geneva.
Russia is sending 2 battalions of S-400 surface-to-air missile systems to Belarus to join military drills there next month. Russian troops and hardware began arriving in the country this week. The military exercises will be held near Belarus's western border with Poland and Lithuania and close to its southern border with Ukraine. Moscow has said the 12 fighter jets and a Pantsir missile system would also be deployed to Belarus for the drills. Meanwhile, the United States announced large-scale NATO naval exercises in the Mediterranean to begin on Monday. The USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier will participate in the drills. China, Iran and Russia have completed joint naval exercises in the Gulf of Oman. The drills were held Tuesday to Thursday this week, that is according to China's Ministry of National Defense. It involved missile cruisers, frigates and anti-submarine ships. China sent a missile destroyer, a supply ship and a number of helicopters. 40 members of the Chinese Navy Marine Corps were also involved. The sides said the exercise was aimed at deepening practical cooperation and building a maritime community with a shared future.
During this joint exercise, we conducted multiple sessions with the Iranian and Russian navies, such as round-the-clock naval gunfiring, formation movement, and joint anti-piracy exercises. These sessions played a positive role in ensuring the safety of international shipping and enhancing the Chinese escort fleet's capability to carry out diversified tasks in the oceans.
Now, Tonga says it's receiving humanitarian aid following a tsunami last weekend, triggered by an underwater volcanic eruption. The remote Pacific island nation was left isolated for days as communication lines were cut. An official says clean-up operations are underway with people gradually returning to work. Owen Poland reports from Auckland.
A new report has just come out from the government of Tonga, which says that 84% of the population has been affected by last weekend's eruption and tsunami. The biggest impact has been on water supplies and sanitation, but the other major issue facing the country now is the damage to the economy. It's estimated that 12,000 households rely on agriculture and fishing and have suffered substantial losses because of the volcanic ash and the acid rain that's fallen on the islands. And the Tongan government says that communication between the islands remains an acute challenge. As one of Tonga's closest neighbours, a third Navy ship has been sent from New Zealand today with essential supplies like tarpaulins and also more drinking water and milk powder. China, Australia and Japan and the United States have also donated emergency supplies. Because Tonga is COVID-free, the international delivery flights have to follow strict protocols to prevent the spread of the virus. So the aid workers going into Tonga have to wear full protective equipment and there can't be any contact with Tongan people. As a result of those restrictions, one aid flight from Australia has had to be turned back after a member of the flight crew tested positive when they arrived. However, that flight has now been rescheduled rather as countries around the Pacific Rim step up their humanitarian aid for Tonga.
Beijing has termed the U.S. decision to suspend flights by 4 Chinese airlines as unreasonable. The Chinese embassy in Washington has urged the United States to stop disrupting and restricting normal passenger flights operated by Chinese airlines. The U.S. announced on Friday that it would bar 44 flights to China in response to Beijing's move to suspend 44 U.S. flights over COVID concerns. The Chinese embassy says the policy of barring flights over positive COVID cases has been applied equally to Chinese and foreign airlines in a fair, open, and transparent way. U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida have agreed to boost economic and trade ties by setting up a new ministerial-level dialogue. The two sides are expected to work on a number of areas, including export controls, supply chains, and technology investments. During a virtual meeting on Friday, the two leaders expressed desire for the swift resolution of trade issues. Bloomberg News says this signals the two sides were unable to agree yet over whether to ease or eliminate tariffs imposed on Japanese steel and aluminium imports by the Trump administration in 2018. Meanwhile, the United States reported nearly 880,000 new COVID cases on Friday. That's according to Johns Hopkins University. The number of new cases has stabilized in recent days, leading to hopes the worst of the Omicron wave is now over. However, the country saw a record number of hospitalizations on Thursday, and deaths having been averaging about 2,000 a day through January. Meanwhile, reports say child COVID cases have spiked dramatically across the country. Nearly 9.5 million children in the U.S. have tested positive for the virus since the start of the pandemic. The Chinese mainland has reported 23 new local COVID cases. The port city of Tianjin found 6. Henan province reported 4 infections. Guangdong province reported 3 cases, all in Zhuhai city. And the capital, Beijing, reported 10 new infections. Starting today, anyone entering Beijing must show a negative test taken within 48 hours before arrival and be tested again within 72 hours after arrival. Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from across the African continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Security concerns mount in Nigeria after insurgents kidnapped 20 children near the town of Chibok. Ghana seeks answers after deadly accident involving a truck transporting mining explosives. And Africans urged to continue being vigilant despite a decline in the latest wave of COVID-19 infections. Hello and welcome to you wherever you're tuning in. This is Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up, Nigerians to pay more than twice the current prices for fuel. That's if a new recommendation is adopted. And in sports, the preliminary draw for next year's Africa Cup of Nations in Côte d'Ivoire takes place in Douala. Welcome to the program. We begin in Nigeria, where jihadists have killed at least 2 people and kidnapped about 20 children in Borno State. According to the community leader from Chibok, Ayuba Alamson, the attack was the 3rd in recent days. It comes as Nigeria struggles with a string of abduction for ransom attacks on schools by criminal gangs over the last year in its northwestern states. Around 1,500 school children were kidnapped last year in about 20 mass abductions in schools across the region. Well, for the very latest on that story, CGTN's Tesem Akende joins us from Abuja in Nigeria. Tesem, this is yet another worrying sign of deteriorating security in parts of the country. What is the latest you can tell us on the attack in Borno State?
Yes, indeed. The latest is that the locals from PM village, which was attacked by the terrorists, are gradually returning back to the communities. Many of them had run away for their safety when the attackers came in and operated for about 3 hours, burning houses, burning vehicles, and looting shops, and of course carrying away the children, which they did. So there's still apprehension in the land. There's tension. They are returning gradually. Many of them were in the bushes. But of course, yes, many of them are coming back. But of course, they are hoping that there'll be more, or there'll be increased military presence. Of course, there's military presence at the moment, but they're hoping that, yes, indeed, there'll be more security personnel deployed to the area to keep the peace.
And Tessim, we're hearing that the abductions happened near the town of Chibok. How will this then impact efforts to convince those who had fled the area to return?
Yes, since the invasion in 2004, talking about the invasion on Chibok community, the Nigerian government stationed a military formation there. They've done really well in building confidence of the people to remain there. But beyond that, there have been a lot of civil-military relations being carried out, not just in Chibok, but across the country, especially within the northeastern and northwestern parts of the country, which have had a lot of invasions by military, by terrorists. So what the military or what the government is doing is that, look, that military formation has been there since 2014. But of course, there's a lot of civil-military relations building on the confidence of the locals in the area. So from time to time, these include activities such as carrying out medical outreaches and, of course, carrying out campaigns to let them know that, look, of course, Nigeria is bedeviled by these challenges, but look, we can overcome them. So this has been going on. And speaking with people, locals in Maiduguri this morning, which is in Borno State, which has been the hotbed of insurgency, they are really confident because a lot of military personnel have been deployed to the area. So these are the things that are going on at the moment, and we're hoping that before long, there will be lasting peace, not just in Chibok, but in the entire northern region, which has had a bad effect of these insurgents.
And looking at possible solutions, then what should the government do to effectively stop these attacks by insurgents?
Yes, the government has been putting together several approaches to tackling these attacks. In June last year, for instance, the president was in Borno State, where he addressed troops keeping the peace there. He charged them to ensure that, look, these insurgents have to be defeated and defeated very squarely. So there have been charges. Of course, the government is also investing in a lot of hardware and software as well to ensure that these vestiges, the remaining vestiges of the insurgents, are tackled. Last year alone, we had the government received 12 Super Tucanos, which it had procured from the United States. And of course, a lot of other armory stored up in its arsenal at the moment. So there's been a lot of efforts, by the military. Of course, there's also a partnership with other security agencies to ensure that, look, this should be addressed and addressed squarely. Just last month, the president said we are at the last phase of defeating the insurgency. So a lot of thoughts are ongoing, a lot of tricks are being put, and approaches are being evolved to ensure that these terrorists are tackled. And so if the assurances of the president are anything to go by, we're hoping that his assurances, which he gave, that we are indeed in the last phase of defeating the insurgents, hope might just be on the horizon that, look, before long there will be peace, and peace, lasting peace in Nigeria.
All right, Tessem, thank you very much for that. CGTN's Tessem Akende joining us live from Abuja. Meanwhile, the United Nations humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, says the extremist insurgency led by Boko Haram and an offshoot of the Islamic State West Africa province is a dangerous and serious security threat. Griffiths is urging the world not to forget the continuing devastation caused by the militia groups in Nigeria.
I think the insurgency is very, very, very dangerous, very threatening. Everybody I spoke to up in Borno talked about it's about being a very different animal, if you like, a different organization, obviously, from Boko Haram, with a view to administering territory and so forth. And this is a very different kind of operation and very difficult also to deter. And it's a grave and clear and present danger, obviously, to the people and a priority for the government.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, at least 180 people are still missing and several are feared dead after a boat they were traveling in capsized in River Congo. Authorities say the boat was overloaded with passengers and cargo. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more now from Kinshasa.
The boat capsized on the Congo River near the DRC's northwestern city of Mbandaka. The city's river commissioner, Compitan Boyo, says the boat had about 600 passengers on board when it capsized late on Sunday. Search and rescue teams say 180 people are still missing. They haven't announced the death toll yet, but there are fears that many of the passengers are dead. Boat accidents are common in the DRC because the vessels are overloaded with passengers and goods. Most boat owners do not provide passengers with life jackets. Last year, more than 60 people died and hundreds were reported dead after a boat capsized on the Congo River in western DRC. The government warned boat owners against traveling at night in overloaded vessels, but many of them have not heeded the call. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
In Ghana, the government says it's investigating a massive blast involving a truck transporting mining explosives that killed more than 10 people and wounded dozens more. The Thursday explosion destroyed scores of homes and left a huge crater in the village of Apiate, 300 kilometers west of the capital, Accra. Mohamed Abubakar has more.
At least 13 people were killed and some injured when a truck carrying explosives collided with a motorcycle in the western part of Ghana. The truck, owned by a company called Maxam, was transporting the explosives to the Chirano gold mine. Hundreds of buildings were reduced to piles of rubble in the blast. Rescuers have been combing the site for survivors. Ghana's government is determined to establish what led to the tragic event. Vice President Mahia Mutua made a visit to the explosion site on Friday.
A major disaster befell us, not only before the community here in Apieti, it befell the whole of Ghana. And that is why His Excellency the President, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, asked me to lead this government delegation to come and assess the situation and see what we are going to do for the people.
Authorities say the investigation into the incident will help determine whether the regulations covering transportation of explosives were complied with.
On behalf of the President and the government, we wish to express our deepest condolences to those who sadly lost their lives from this very, very sad incident.
At least 45 people are being treated in hospital. The government says it will cover the cost of hospital bills and help with relief aid for those affected. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
In Ethiopia, TPLF rebels have accused the Deputy Chief of Staff of Ethiopia's military, the ENDF, of promising to continue the civil war. TPLF spokesperson Getachew Reda said the announcement goes against the public declaration of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed for peaceful dialogue. Here is CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
TPLF's accusation came after General Abebaw Tadeser, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Ethiopian Army, said in an interview that the NDF will certainly march on Tigray to finish the job of lowering the enemy force into a level where they pose no more threat to the nation's security and sovereignty.
This enemy is still alive. It is preparing a big army of hundreds of thousands of people. It's doing that under the pretext of defending Tigray. It also excavates the weapons it has buried for 27 years. Similarly, it's working to fix its operations capabilities. This force is not terminated. It must be terminated. Without terminating this force, Ethiopia will not guarantee its peace.
TPLF spokesperson Getachew Reda in response said, and I quote, "The general's declaration appears to be a snub at Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's public declaration on which the UN Secretary General's optimism was built. We are not losing sleep over his plan." End of quote. On the other hand, General Abebaw says in the concluded first chapter of the war, TPLF forces have lost big in all areas.
TPLF did not continue with the number it had started the war with. Second, it did not return with the tanks and cannons it came with. It did not return with the same air defense system it came with. We have destroyed what the TPLF came to attack us with. They have lost their elite frontline army leaders, except those leading from 300 kilometers away.
The war in Ethiopia's north has claimed thousands of lives and at least 2.5 million people need active day-to-day humanitarian assistance. The economic toll of the war is also something Ethiopia must address. With the proposed national dialogue, the political leadership of the country hopes to put an end to that war and any differences too. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
To Sudan now, where General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has announced the assigning of the Deputy Minister of the Sudanese ministries to carry out the roles of ministers within the framework of a caretaker government. As CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy reports, this has ignited a fresh round of controversy because the country does not yet have a designated prime minister.
Sudan has remained without an executive body after former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok failed to form a government before his resignation. And the announcement of a caretaker government by military commander General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, it's believed, could pave the way for Sudan to hold elections without naming a prime minister to succeed Hamdok. But many residents are divided over this move. Some emphasize the need to fill the constitutional vacuum the country is experiencing in the absence of the government, saying it has negatively affected their lives.
I am with Al-Burhan's decision to form a caretaker government because any ruling without a caretaker will have a vacuum, and any vacuum will result in things that they have no control over.
General Al-Burhan's announcement has also angered some political forces and civil groups within the Forces for Freedom and Change.
This is an experience we were completely afraid of. It means a complete collapse of the Sudanese state, and so far 85 days have passed, and this regime has not been able to appoint a prime minister or appoint ministers. So it's resorted to the caretaker government.
Analysts, however, believe the military component's resort to appointing a caretaker government was due to the halt in the executive work in the country. They say this is a great opportunity for the United Nations to help resolve the current political crisis in Sudan. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the United Nations office in Somalia has closed its passenger operations facility at Mogadishu's international airport. The shutdown of the VIP terminal for UN staff and diplomats follows a directive from the government in December last year. Here's Mohamed Kahie with the details.
The UN office in Somalia followed the directive in December by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in shutting down the significant facility. They regret the closure, which was apparently prompted by allegations that are yet to be presented to them in detail for inquiry. International relations experts say the decision was unnecessary.
The Somali government, if they felt there is some irregularities in the MOFCON office or the facilities, they have to check first and provide proper evidence to the UN office in order to allow the US office to take action against the MOFCON. And then just to issue the order to close the office, it wasn't a nice one.
Somali government directed both UN and AMISOM staff to use the VIP lounge at Aden Ade International Airport, which analysts say will congest the facility.
As we know, in Mogadishu, we are having such security problem. So, and then the airport itself now is having a lot of burden to Somali people. So to bring again to the foreigners, including the diplomat, will make more burden to the Somali authority. So I think it's better to let the terminal, MOFCON terminal to be open and operate, but to make sure if there is any errors they were there, should be corrected.
Political analysts argue that there is need for Somali authorities to closely monitor the borders, especially during the ongoing parliamentary poll process.
As you're aware, we are in an electioneering period, and during the poll process there is a lot of financial security issues. That is why Somali government is very interested to closely monitor what is happening inside the airport. Most diplomats have influence in the elections. That's why the government is interested in the activities inside the airport.
The UN has been engaged in Somalia since its independence in 1960, undertaking activities that encourage development, support peace building and security, while mitigating the impact of conflict on the Somali people. Mohamed Kahie, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
The World Health Organization has reiterated the need to maintain efforts to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, and also says vaccination remains one of the best defenses against the severity of the disease. And while some countries are hopeful of an end to the most recent wave of the pandemic, African scientists are warning that Africa isn't out of the woods just yet. Wilkista Nyabwa has the details.
For the first time since the start of the Omicron-fueled fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, Africa is seeing a significant drop in new cases and a dip in reported deaths. Countries like South Africa, which reported early cases of the Omicron variant, now have a cautious hope that the fourth wave of the pandemic is nearing its end.
The signs are that the fourth wave is receding in South Africa, as it is as well in the continent, apart from the uptick that we are seeing in some North African countries, which are going through what would be their winter season. It's similar to the patterns that are being seen in some of the northern countries.
But the World Health Body warns that the continent has yet to turn the tide on the pandemic, adding that there is no room for complacency.
What will happen next after Omicron? We do not know. Just like we did not know what would happen next after Delta. Could we get another more aggressive variant? That's also a possibility. On that note, yes, we still encourage everybody who is eligible to get vaccinated because we do not know what's happening next.
Altogether, the WHO has approved 11 therapeutics to tackle COVID-19, but African countries continue to face impediments in accessing a full range of treatments. So far, Africa has received about 500 million COVID-19 vaccine doses and administered 327 million. Only about 10% of the continent's population is fully vaccinated, and scientists across the globe continue to emphasize that universal access to diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics are likely to pave the shortest path to the end of the pandemic. Wilkes Anyabwa, CGTN.
Now, for decades, Tanzania has been a transit point for thousands of Ethiopian and Somali immigrants, with locals partly responsible for their continued flow into the country. The International Organization for Migration says illegal immigrants pay smugglers anything between $1,600 and $3,000 to make the journey to southern African countries. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has more.
A vast land area and porous borders offer many illegal immigrants easy access into Tanzania. The government reports that in the last couple of years, over 15,000 of them have been apprehended in various parts of the country. This security analyst says, compared to some of its neighbors, Tanzania has advantages that attract many illegal immigrants in transit.
Amani na utulivu, lakini pia
peace and security and the good quality of infrastructure in Tanzania could be one of the reasons that draw people to Tanzania, because they know that it's easy to get from one point to another.
Authorities say there's not enough manpower to catch the immigrants and locals who help them evade law enforcement officials. To address this, the government says this year it plans to increase the number of officers policing the country.
We will continue to be vigilant to ensure that all those who enter the country follow the procedures and the laws of the country.
The country's immigration authority says locals who help immigrants for financial gain are putting the country at risk. It says that there have been a number of reports of immigrants being involved in violent crimes in the country.
While the number of illegal immigrants passing through the country has gone down from a high of 20,000 every year a decade ago to less than 15,000 currently, the problem still persists. Local smugglers and continued crisis in the home countries of the immigrants is making it harder for Tanzanian authorities to reduce that number further.
At the request of Ethiopia, some 1,700 illegal immigrants were set free from Tanzanian jails early last year to be repatriated. Experts say joint strategies such as these may be the only way to solve the problem.
If countries share the right information and if each nation is responsible for its own territory, then it could be the first step in helping to solve the problem of why these individuals leave their country and go elsewhere.
Experts say the problem of illegal immigrants may take years to fix due to its complexity. They argue that improving the situation in the immigrants' home countries will dissuade them from making the treacherous journey south in the first place. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Let's head to Liberia now, where the Ducor Palace Hotel once stood as a mark of splendor and luxury. It was Liberia's pride and joy in the 1960s and one of the world's most luxurious five-star hotels. However, the ruins of this palace are now a den of squatters and drug addicts. The establishment that overlooks the Atlantic Ocean and the St. Paul River now serves as a memory of its golden age.
This is the Ducor Hotel, situated in Liberia's capital, Monrovia. At its height, it hosted VIPs such as former Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie. When it opened its doors in 1960, the Ducor was one of the only five-star hotels in Africa, boasting a nightclub and air-conditioned rooms. It now lies in ruins after shutting its door in 1989, owing to years of back-to-back civil wars that killed more than 250,000 people.
After
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf took over, Gaddafi came and wanted to take over the building. He wanted to lease this place, and the government told the squatters that were here to leave the building.
It was our in here to leave the building.
According to a 2011 government statement, the renovated hotel was due to have 151 rooms, restaurants, a shopping centre, a tennis court and a casino, as well as provide jobs to the impoverished country. But then Liberia cut ties with Gaddafi's Libya in 2011 and Libya descended into civil war. The project, which was priced at $65 million, also fell afoul of another war.
When the squatters left, they took everything out. They even took carpets, walls. They took everything out.
As for Juco, some still remain hopeful that the once magnificent establishment can reclaim its former glory. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Right, well, we're taking another short break here on Africa Live. Here's what's coming up in the business. Nigerians to pay more than twice the current prices for fuel if a new recommendation is adopted.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's start the business off in Nigeria, where the country's National Economic Council has recommended a substantial increase in the price of petrol in the country. Now, if the recommendation is approved by President Muhammadu Buhari, the price of petrol, which is currently sold at about 40 cents per litre, will jump to about $1 per litre effective next month. But as our correspondent Tesem Akende reports, some experts are warning that the petrol hike will be disastrous for the majority in the country.
The price of petrol has been a contentious issue in Nigeria for decades, and it looks set to double in the next few weeks. The Nigerian government has been subsidizing fuel since the 1970s, when the country's refineries became largely moribund and they had to rely on expensive imports. It spent over $2 billion in subsidies between January and October last year alone. Authorities say eliminating the subsidies will ensure fair competition in the market pricing for petrol. Governors in the country in May last year recommended the same increase, but it was rejected after widespread public opposition. But the National Economic Council, which is headed by the nation's vice president, has advised that the price increase starts in February. The NEC claims the move will save the government hundreds of millions of dollars each month and help boost public finances. But experts say there are fears the increase in petrol price could be disastrous for the country's poorest people. More than 80 million Nigerians live below $1.90 a day. The government has pledged to fix the defunct refineries to help lower the cost of petrol. Nigeria is the largest oil-producing nation in Africa, yet it imports its petroleum products from other countries with better infrastructure. A fuel subsidy has been promised to help lessen the blow for some of those who can least afford the price rise. Tassim Akende, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, the US-led sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe 2 decades ago have had a far-reaching and probably unintended impact on the Zimbabwean economy. The move came when then-President Robert Mugabe launched a violent election crackdown. The sanctions are strangling the country's access to the international banking system, limiting much-needed funds for economic recovery.
The American law known as the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, ZIDERA, forbids global lenders from working with Zimbabwe. This is one of the biggest wounds suffered by the Zimbabwean economy. Intended to apply to the elite, the sanctions imposed travel bans and a freeze on assets held by top Zimbabwean officials. But it had a ripple effect.
These sanctions have let us down and continue to suppress our business, and the wish is to see us suffer, but God will not forsake us.
We used to employ over 350 employees here. We are now down to less than 50 employees. Just that tells you what sanctions are. We used to train refrigeration mechanics, and all the refrigeration mechanics that we've trained, which are much more than 300, have all left the country and are working all elsewhere outside the country.
For the sanctions to be lifted, Zimbabwe is required to hold better elections and respect human rights, but also adhere to the South African court ruling to pay some $9 billion to white farmers whose properties were seized during Mugabe's land reforms 2 decades ago. With little action from the government and sustained pressure on the citizens, some are speaking up.
We don't want conditions to be given to the government or the people of Zimbabwe to say do this so that we'll remove sanctions. Actually, especially when it's being done by the so-called people who claim to be masters of democracy and human rights, yet they fail to uphold the things that they preach.
Zimbabwe's entire GDP is only $16.7 billion. Harare has made initial payouts of $53 million, a tiny fraction of the amount demanded. The result is that Zimbabwe's meager supplies of US dollars at home continue to create a risk for entrepreneurs to seek access to greenbacks abroad via private banks. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now, in Uganda, the entertainment industry is getting set to reopen after a closure of 2 years due to the coronavirus pandemic. The East African country has been reopening its economy in phases, with the entertainment sector being last to reopen. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria reports.
Concerts are hitting the stage again after 2 years. Music groups say the lapse has enabled them to hone their vocals and can't wait to get back on stage.
There is that urge that is within you that when should they open so that I start, so that I show them. Yeah? And then there is also that urge with the fans that when should they open? We want to go and enjoy as we used to enjoy.
In Uganda, pubs, discotheques and music concerts had remained closed even when the rest of the economy was reopened. The disruptions caused financial losses, with many entertainment spots shutting down. This musical band is getting set for one of their biggest live stage performances in a few days. The group is hoping to give their fans a thrill of 2 years lost time with their shows. Events organizers expect to cash in on Kampala's nightlife that had gone completely dead. Before the pandemic, Kampala was known for its vibrant nightlife.
Sometimes we even used to perform and some people don't pay the full amount as you had agreed. So we have learned that despite the fact that we do this for fun, in the end it is business and we are working for our future.
Pubs have begun restocking their shelves to ensure revelers enjoy a taste of different drinks.
I feel like people have missed out so much, and they want to come and enjoy themselves. Yes, it's going to be a crazy crowd.
The government is advising events planners to hold outdoor functions for social distancing rules. The capacity of gatherings have been set at 200, but the government says this number could be revised depending on whether cases climb up. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Well, thank you for staying with us on Africa Live. Here's what's coming up in the sport. The preliminary draw